In a cold courtroom, a boy faced the wealthy judge. He didn't come to ask for money. He came to ask for a voice. His mother, silent, hid a burden no one dared to name. What happens when a simple truth pierces a heart armored by robes and ledgers? One phrase changes the hearing inside out. A gaze alters destinies. Are you ready to witness the extent of a son's courage? And what awakens when power meets conscience? The singer machine groaned in the corner of the room. Eleanor Ellie Vance pressed the pedal with her right foot, her fingers guiding the fabric under the needle with a precision that came from years of sewing in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood. The apartment in Pilsen was small, 2 rooms smelling of reheated coffee and Leo's laundry detergent. The yellow light from the single bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly every time a truck passed on the avenue below. The March heat clung to her skin, even with the window open. The city's noise, distant horns, neighbors' voices, music from a corner bar, drifted in with the warm air. Leo slept on the sofa bed 3 meters from her, 10 years old, thin, with black hair matted to his forehead from the heat. Even in sleep, he clutched his school notebook to his chest, as if fearing someone would snatch it from his hands during the night. Ellie looked at her son and felt a knot in her throat. The rent was due in 4 days. She had $320 in her wallet. The rent was $1,200. She had calculated and recalculated 1,000 times, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. She turned her eyes back to the party dress she was sewing, navy blue satin, an order from a client who would pay $200 once it was finished. 2 more pieces in the next 48 hours, and maybe, just maybe, she could cover the difference. Ellie's hands trembled, not from fear, but from contained rage, a cold anger that had grown since the day Frederick fled. Sterling, owner of Sterling & Co. Apparel, her workplace for 4 years, had dismissed her without cause. She still remembered the smell of sweat and stale coffee from that cramped office, the walls yellowed by the smoke from his incessant cigarettes. The just cause, he had said, was insubordination. The truth was different. Ellie had reported the unpaid overtime to the Department of Labor. She had everything documented: WhatsApp messages from her supervisor, altered time cards, her own entry and exit notes in a small notebook she kept hidden in her purse. She thought the law would protect her. She was wrong. 3 days after the complaint, Fred called her into his office, a cramped cubicle that smelled of stale cigarettes and mold, and told her she was fired. Just like that. No rights, no notice, nothing. His smile at that moment was something she couldn't erase from her memory. Cold, calculated, victorious. Then came the eviction. Mr. Davies, the building manager from Sterling Property Management, a stout, gray-suited man with sweat patches under his arms, knocked on her door with the official paperwork. Ellie was 6 days late on her rent. 6 days. He gave her 10 to leave. When Ellie tried to explain, he cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if shooing a fly. "You're not the only tenant in the building, Miss Vance. There are people waiting in line." He didn't even look at her when he spoke, as if Ellie was just another bureaucratic problem to be resolved. What she didn't know was that Fred Sterling had connections. The building where she lived belonged to an old real estate fund, and Fred had invested years before, when he was still building the apparel empire now exploiting seamstresses like Ellie. He wanted to silence her. He wanted her to disappear before the inspection progressed and uncovered the irregular contracts of 20 other women who sewed until 3 in the morning without receiving overtime pay. Ellie turned off the machine. The sudden silence made Leo stir on the sofa. She rose, walked to him, and adjusted the thin sheet over her son's small body. The boy didn't open his eyes, but murmured something incomprehensible, clutching his school notebook tighter. Ellie kissed his warm forehead, sensing the cheap shampoo, the scent of a child. For a moment, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the weariness, not just the physical exhaustion of sleepless nights, but the weariness of carrying everything alone, having no one to lean on. She took a deep breath, returned to the singer, and switched the machine back on. She had work to do. Lincoln Elementary School was a 15-minute walk from the apartment. Leo had gone alone since he was 8, always with his worn backpack on his back and his school notebook in hand. He liked school. He liked his math teacher, Miss Albright, who explained problems patiently and never made him feel dumb when he made a mistake. He liked recess when he shared his lunch with Sam, the boy who lived in the building next door and had a stray dog named Buddy. He even liked the smell of chalk and the cafeteria food, served on aluminum trays. But in the last 3 weeks, Leo had missed school 4 times. Not because he was sick, not because he didn't want to go, but because he was afraid to leave his mother alone. Ellie sewed late, sometimes until 4 in the morning. Then she slept 2 hours and woke to make his breakfast before school. But Leo saw the deep circles under her eyes, saw how she trembled holding her cup, saw how she sometimes lost her balance getting up from her chair. And he was afraid to go to school and return to find his mother collapsed on the floor. Afraid that something would happen and he wouldn't be there. It was a nameless fear. A fear that grew in his stomach and wouldn't let him breathe properly. So, on the days his mother sewed all night, Leo stayed awake too. He sat beside her at the living room table, did his homework, reviewed his math problems, and every half hour he looked up to make sure she was okay. Sometimes, when she went to the bathroom, he timed her. If it took longer than 3 minutes, he'd knock on the door. "Mom, are you all right in there?" And Ellie always replied, her voice tired, "Yes, honey, just a minute." In the early hours, the apartment grew silent. Just the sound of the singer, the occasional noise of a car passing below, the distant bark of some dog. Leo fought against sleep, his eyes burning, his head heavy. Sometimes he dozed off with his face against his notebook, waking minutes later with a start, checking if his mother was still there. And she always was, bent over the machine, her fingers moving the fabric with automatic precision. On Thursday morning, the school principal, Principal Miller, a short woman with thick glasses and gray hair tied in a tight bun, called Leo into her office. He walked in with his notebook tucked under his arm and stood by the door, waiting. The office smelled of old paper and coffee. "Have a seat, Leo." He sat down. The chair was hard plastic and rattled when he moved. "You've been missing a lot of school, haven't you?" Leo looked at his hands. "Yes, Principal Miller." "Does your mother know?" "She does." "And why have you been missing?" He didn't answer. The principal sighed, took off her glasses, and rubbed her eyes. "Leo, we're worried about you. You're a good student. Miss Albright told me you get the best grades in math in your class. But if you keep missing, you'll fall behind." "I know," he murmured. "Then explain it to me. What's happening at home?" Leo clutched the notebook against his chest. He thought about telling her everything, about the workshop, about the dismissal, about the sleepless nights, but the words wouldn't come. He was afraid that if he spoke, they would take him away from his mother. He was afraid of being taken to a strange place, far from her. "Nothing, Principal Miller. I'm just helping my mom." The principal looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and dialed a number. Leo heard the conversation, his heart pounding hard in his chest. She was talking to someone from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. She mentioned his name. She mentioned his absences. She mentioned the possibility of a home visit. When she hung up, she looked at Leo with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Don't worry, okay? We just want to help. But Leo left the office feeling that something bad was about to happen. The school hallway seemed longer than usual. His legs trembled. Brenda Jenkins knocked on Ellie's door on a Tuesday afternoon. She was a tall, black woman, with curly hair pulled back in a low bun, and eyes that seemed to assess every detail around her. She wore a navy blue blouse and black pants, and carried a brown folder, its edges worn. There was something in her posture, straight shoulders, chin slightly raised, that communicated authority without needing words. "Good afternoon. Are you Eleanor Vance?" "That's me. My name is Brenda Jenkins. I'm a social worker with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. May I come in?" Ellie felt her stomach drop. She opened the door and stepped aside. The apartment was tidy. She always kept everything clean, even when she barely had the strength to stand. The pile of clothes for sewing was folded in a cardboard box beside the singer. The table was clean. The sofa bed was made. But Ellie knew no amount of tidying could hide what truly mattered, the poverty that permeated every corner, the smell of dampness in the walls, the cracks in the ceiling. Brenda looked around carefully. She wrote something on the clipboard she'd brought. Her eyes lingered on the singer, on the boxes of thread, on the half-finished navy blue dress on the table. "You work here at home, ma'am?" "Yes, I do custom sewing. And your son? Leo, isn't it?" "That's right. He attends school?" "Yes, he does, at Lincoln Elementary School." "He's been absent." Ellie closed her eyes. "I know." "Why?" Ellie took a deep breath. She told her everything. She told her about Sterling and Co. Apparel, about Frederick Sterling, about the complaint, about the termination. She told her about the imminent eviction, about the sleepless nights sewing to pay the rent. She told her about Leo, about the boy's fear of leaving her alone. As she spoke, she felt her throat tighten, but she forced the words out. She couldn't afford to break down now. Brenda listened without interruption. She took notes. When Ellie finished, she remained silent for a moment. There was something in her expression. It wasn't harshness, but it wasn't outright compassion either. It was somewhere between professional duty and a recognition of a reality she witnessed every day. "Do you have family? Anyone who can help?" "No. My mother died 3 years ago. I have no siblings. Leo's father, he disappeared when the boy was 2 years old." Brenda Jenkins made another note. Then, she looked at Ellie Vance with an expression that was hard to decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It was something between concern and duty. "Miss Vance, I'm going to be honest with you. The situation here is delicate. I see that you love your son. I see that you're doing your best. But I also see that you're at your breaking point. And when an adult is at their breaking point, the child suffers too. Leo's absences, the routine he has here, this isn't healthy for him." "I know," Ellie whispered, "but I'm trying. I'm doing everything I can. I know you are. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes we need structure. And right now, you don't have that structure." Brenda paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Ellie nodded. Her vision blurred by tears she refused to let fall. "What's going to happen?" Brenda sighed. "I'm going to write a report. I'll recommend closer monitoring, and I'll suggest that, temporarily, Leo stay in a shelter until you can stabilize your financial situation." "No." The word shot out. "Please, don't take my son from me." "It's not taking, Ms. Vance. It's protecting. Both him and you. I won't allow it." Brenda looked at her firmly. "This isn't solely up to you. The judge will decide." She closed her folder and stood up. "The hearing will be scheduled. You'll receive notification in a few days." When Brenda left, Ellie stood motionless in the middle of the room, staring at the closed door. Then slowly, she sat on the floor and allowed the tears to finally fall. The Cook County Circuit Court. Housed within the imposing concrete structure of the Daily Center on Washington Street, loomed large. Ellie entered the main doors on a Thursday morning, clutching Leo's school notebook and a folder filled with every document she had managed to gather: pay stubs, supervisor messages, and time logs. Leo walked beside her, silent, his backpack on his shoulders. The building smelled of stale air and industrial cleaner, a combination that made Ellie feel nauseous. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. It was 9:30. Ellie sat on a wooden bench in the hallway and waited. Leo sat beside her, his legs dangling, not quite reaching the floor. Around them, other people waited. A man in a wrinkled suit sifting through papers. A woman with a baby on her lap. Two lawyers conversing in low voices. The air was heavy, thick with collective anxiety. "Mom," he whispered. "What is it, sweetie?" "I'm scared." Ellie took his small hand. It was cold, even with the warmth in the air. "I am too, but we're going to stay together, okay? No matter what happens." She squeezed his fingers tightly, trying to convey a certainty she didn't feel. At 10 o'clock, her name was called. Ellie and Leo entered a spacious room with white walls and a long, dark wood table. On one side sat Mr. Davies of Sterling Property Management, a bald man in a gray suit with a black leather briefcase. On the other, Brenda Jenkins, dressed in the same clothes as when she had visited the apartment. The ceiling fan spun slowly, unable to cool the stuffy air. And in the center, behind the table, sat the judge. Judge Miles Harrington was 43 years old. Tall, broad-shouldered, with black hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a black robe and thin-rimmed glasses. His eyes were dark, almost black, holding a coolness Ellie recognized, the chill of someone who had seen too much, who wasn't easily impressed. But there was something more, too, an acute attention, as if he were reading between lines others missed. Judge Harrington looked at Ellie. He looked at Leo. Then he opened the file before him and began to read. Mr. Davies spoke first. He argued that the rent delay was unacceptable, that there were rules, that the law was clear. He cited dates, amounts, contractual clauses. He did not mention Frederick Sterling. He did not mention the labor complaint. He mentioned nothing that might complicate the case. His voice was monotone, almost tedious, as if he were reciting a memorized script. Brenda spoke next. She read the report she had written. She mentioned the school absences, the exhausting routine, the lack of a support network. She cautiously recommended that Leo be temporarily removed from the home until the situation stabilized. There was something mechanical in her delivery, as if she wished to emotionally distance herself from the words she had to speak. Ellie spoke last. She recounted her sewing business, the complaint, the termination. She presented the documents. She explained that the rent delay had a direct cause, the loss of income following the wrongful termination. She spoke with a steady voice, without crying, without pleading, simply stating the facts. But her hands trembled as she held the papers, and Judge Harrington noticed. Judge Harrington listened in silence. He took notes. He did not interrupt. His eyes, however, moved constantly, from Ellie to the documents, from the documents to Leo, from Leo back to Ellie. He was assessing, calculating, weighing the significance of each word. And then the door opened. Leo, who had remained seated beside his mother the entire time, stood up. The bailiff approached him to guide him back to his seat, but Judge Harrington raised a hand. "Let the boy stay." Leo walked to the front of the table. He clutched his school notebook as if it were a shield. He took a deep breath and looked directly into the judge's eyes. The silence in the room was absolute. "I am here to defend my mother," he said. Judge Miles Harrington was not easily moved. 30 years as a lawyer, 10 as a judge, had taught him emotion and justice must stay separate. He'd seen it all: lying mothers, abusive fathers, manipulating lawyers, fabricating witnesses. He'd learned to distrust tears, pleas, stories too good to be true. Yet, something in that boy, the firmness of his voice, the way he clutched the notebook, made Miles lean slightly forward. Not pity. Professional curiosity mixed with something unnameable. "You may speak," he said. Leo opened the notebook. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates, times, amounts. The script was childish, yet the information precise, methodical. He showed the first page. "My mother sewed 15 dresses in November. Each paid $200. She received only $1,800. 1,200 were missing." He turned the page. "Here are the supervisor's messages asking her to work late. Here are the timesheets she signed. And here," he turned another page, "are the hours she actually worked. I wrote it all down." Miles took the notebook. He slowly flipped through it. Each page was names of coworkers also doing unpaid overtime, addresses, phone numbers. There were even small drawings in the margins, arrows connecting information, boxes highlighting important dates. It was a child's work, but organized with an investigator's logic. "Did you do this yourself?" Miles asked. "Yes, sir. My mother didn't know. She thought I was doing homework." Miles looked at Ellie. She was pale, her hands trembling in her lap. Tears streamed silently down her face. But she made no sound. There was something devastating in that silent weeping, the shame of exposure, wounded pride, the immense love for her son who'd done all this. "And do you have anything else?" Leo took his mother's old cell phone from his pants pocket. He unlocked it and opened the gallery. "I recorded videos, late at night, to show she was truly working." He handed the phone to Miles. The judge watched. In the video, Ellie sat before the singer, sewing. The digital wall clock read 3:27 a.m. The machine's pedal echoed in silence. In the background, distant car hum from the avenue. The camera trembled slightly. Leo must have held the phone, fighting sleep. Miles watched 3 videos. All had different dates and times. All showed Ellie working late into the night. In one, he heard her cough, a dry, deep cough. In another, she rose for water, her movements slow, heavy. When he finished, Judge Miles Harrington returned the phone. He looked at Leo Vance, and for the first time in years, felt something stir within him. It wasn't pity. It was respect. That 10-year-old boy already understood what many adults would never learn, that truth requires evidence, that words alone are not enough, that the system demands documentation. "Did you miss school to stay with your mother?" "Yes, sir, but I made up the tests. It's all here." Leo pulled the report card from his backpack. "I got an 8 in math, a 9 in English, a 7 in science." Judge Miles Harrington took the report card. He checked it. Everything was correct. The grades were excellent. There was even a note from Ms. Albright. "Leo is an exemplary student. He shows maturity beyond his age. You are a brave boy," he said. "I just want to protect my mom." Leo's voice wavered for the first time. "She's all I have." Judge Miles Harrington looked at Brenda Jenkins. She was writing something, her face serious. He looked at Mr. Davies, Sterling Property Management, who shuffled papers with visible discomfort. He looked at Ellie Vance, who was now crying silently, her head bowed. Then, Judge Miles Harrington brought down the gavel. The sound echoed in the room. I am suspending any decision regarding separation for 15 days. I order all these documents to be added to the case file. I also order a hearing with labor enforcement to investigate the allegations presented. Regarding the eviction, I am keeping the analysis ongoing, but I request that the property management present the complete chain of ownership for the property. He paused. He looked directly at Ellie Vance. You were brave to come forward with these allegations. And your son is proving that courage is learned at home. The property management's response arrived a week later. Judge Miles Harrington was in his chambers, reviewing other cases, when his assistant knocked on the door. It was Carlos, a 28-year-old slender man with glasses, always efficient. But now there was something different in his expression, a concern Judge Miles Harrington rarely saw. Judge, there's something strange here. Judge Miles Harrington took the document. He read it, reread it, and felt his stomach drop. The words seemed to leap off the page, accusatory. The building where Ellie Vance lived belonged to a real estate fund called Harrington Holdings Group, a fund created by Judge Miles Harrington's father 30 years prior, when he was still building the family's real estate empire. Judge Miles Harrington had distanced himself from the business since taking the bench. He did not participate in meetings, did not sign documents, had no access to management. But legally, technically, he was still one of the indirect beneficiaries of the fund. His name was there, in small print, on the 5th page of the document, and that was enough. There was a conflict of interest. Miles remained silent for a long moment. He looked out the window. Outside, Chicago buzzed under the midday sun. Cars honked. People rushed. Life went on, indifferent to the individual crises unfolding within that gray building. He thought of all the decisions he had made over the years, all the times he had refused to give in to pressure, all the times he had chosen the cold letter of the law over personal considerations. And now, precisely now, when it mattered more than ever, he found himself caught in the same web of family connections he had always tried to avoid. He could ignore it. He could pretend he hadn't seen. No one would know. The fund was old, the connections indirect. It would be easy to argue he was unaware of the exact portfolio composition. But Miles knew himself. He knew the weight he would carry for the rest of his life if he took that path. And he also knew the look in that 10-year-old boy's eyes, holding a school notebook. Then he picked up his pen and began to write. He drafted a clear and objective order, acknowledging the conflict, mandating the immediate suspension of the eviction as a precautionary measure, and requesting the redistribution of the case to another magistrate. Furthermore, he forwarded copies of everything to the Illinois Attorney General's office, Worker Protection Unit, citing evidence of economic coercion and retaliation against a whistleblower. Each word was a brick being laid, each sentence an irreversible decision. When he finished, he called his aide. File this immediately and notify the parties. Judge, are you sure? This will cause... I am sure. The aide hesitated. The press will talk about this. You know that, right? I know. Miles took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. But if I don't do this now, I won't be able to look myself in the mirror tomorrow. The aide left. Miles remained alone in his chambers, looking out the window. Down below, Chicago buzzed. Cars, buses, people rushing back and forth. He thought of Ellie. He thought of Leo. He thought of the way the boy had clutched his notebook, as if it were the only thing that mattered in the world. And he thought of himself, of all the choices that had brought him to this point: law school, advocacy, the magistracy, the deliberate distancing from his family's businesses. He had spent his entire life trying to distance himself from the Harrington name, trying to prove he was more than the son of a wealthy businessman, trying to build a reputation based on merit, not inheritance. And now, ironically, it was precisely that family name that forced him to make the most difficult decision of his career. For the first time in a long while, Miles Harrington felt he had done the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the convenient thing, but the right thing. And that, he knew, was all that mattered. The news spread. First in the hallways of the Cook County Circuit Court, then at the Illinois Attorney General's office, then in the local papers. Judge recuses himself in eviction case involving own family, was the headline of the Chicago Tribune. The article was on page 3, with an old photo of Miles at a ceremony. The text was neutral, factual, but the subtext suggested something more. Integrity, perhaps, or political prudence. Miles's colleagues discreetly greeted him in the corridors, some with genuine admiration, others with that professional cordiality that concealed judgment. Ellie read the news on her phone, sitting in the kitchen of her apartment. Leo was beside her, eating bread with margarine. Breakfast was simple. It always had been. But that morning it tasted of hope. "Mom, what does this mean?" "It means the judge was honest," Ellie replied. She reread the article once more, trying to grasp all the implications. "It means he didn't want to judge our case because he had an interest in it." "But is that good or bad?" "It's good, son. Very good." Ellie looked at her son and felt a lump in her throat. How many people in the judge's position would have done the same? How many would have chosen the harder path, the path that exposed their own vulnerabilities? 2 days later, the case was reassigned to another division. The new judge, Judge Thomas Hayes, was a man in his 50s, with graying hair, known for his objectivity. He analyzed everything: Ellie's documents, Leo's notebook, the videos, Brenda's report, and accepted the defense's arguments. He denied the eviction. He ruled that the property management company should await the conclusion of the labor investigation before taking any further action. There was no favor. There was a clear connection between facts and rights. There was also the precedent set by Miles, the precautionary suspension, the documented signs of retaliation. Meanwhile, the Worker Protection Unit of the Illinois Attorney General's office was making progress. An assistant attorney general named David Chen took over the case. He was a short, stocky man, fast-talking, with keen eyes. He had a reputation for being meticulous, almost obsessive. He summoned Ellie to testify. He summoned Leo, who answered questions with the same seriousness he applied to his math lessons. He summoned Brenda, who confirmed the information in her report, but also recognized the strength and organization of that family. And he summoned Maria Rodriguez. Maria was Ellie's former colleague at Sterling & Co. Apparel. She worked as a logistics manager and had access to the timesheets, the documents showing actual work hours versus those recorded in the system. For years, she had kept her mouth shut. She was afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of Fred. She was afraid of what might happen if she spoke up. She had bills to pay, children to raise. Silence, she told herself, was survival. But when she saw Ellie's case in the Chicago Tribune, when she saw the 10-year-old boy defending his mother, something inside her shifted. She read the article 3 times. She looked at her own children, 2 teenagers who gazed at her as if she were the strongest person in the world. And she asked herself, what kind of example was she setting? Maria called the Illinois Attorney General's office. She said she had evidence. She said she wanted to help. Her voice trembled on the phone, but the words came out firm. Everything organized, all stamped with dates and times. There were even handwritten notes in the margins, observations she had made over the years, small reminders about inconsistencies she had witnessed. Assistant Attorney General David Chen opened the files and felt a shiver. These were not isolated irregularities. It was an entire system of exploitation. Frederick Sterling manipulated the records of more than 30 seamstresses. He suppressed hours, forged signatures, all to cut costs and meet targets imposed by clients. Major apparel brands that demanded impossible deadlines and low prices. "This is gold," David told Maria. He flipped through the documents with impressive speed, his eyes gleaming. "You know you'll have to testify, right?" "I know," she replied, "and I want to." Frederick Sterling was summoned for a deposition 2 weeks later. He arrived at the Cook County Circuit Court, accompanied by 3 lawyers, all in black suits and leather briefcases. One of them was famous, attorney Patricia Green, an expensive criminal defense lawyer who defended businessmen in complicated cases. Frederick wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, Italian shoes gleaming under the fluorescent corridor light. There was something theatrical about his entrance. His confident strides, his chin held high, the smile of someone who knew exactly how much power he wielded. He sat in the chair as if in a business meeting, shoulders relaxed, legs crossed. He accepted the coffee the officer offered, sipping slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. When Assistant Attorney General Chen began to present the documents, Frederick didn't even blink. He looked at the spreadsheets, at the emails, at the messages. His eyes moved calmly across the page, unhurried, without nervousness. Then he smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there, cold, calculated. "All of this is a lie, a fabrication. That woman," he pointed at Ellie, who was sitting across the room, "is angry because I fired her. Now she wants to screw me over." "And the timesheets?" David asked, pushing a stack of documents toward Frederick. "Are you saying your own production manager forged all of this?" "Of course. She was always problematic, always stirred up trouble." Frederick leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped over his stomach. "These women, Assistant Attorney General, they don't understand how a company works. They think we're here to run a charity." Assistant Attorney General David Chen felt his anger rise. He took a deep breath. "What about the videos? The ones Ms. Vance's son recorded?" Fred Sterling shrugged. "Anyone can record a video. It proves nothing." He looked at Ellie Vance with poorly disguised contempt. "She probably staged everything, taught the kid to lie." Ellie felt her hands tremble. She wanted to stand, to scream, to cross the room and hit that man who had so easily destroyed her life. But she remained seated, silent, because she knew the truth didn't need shouts. David Chen leaned forward. He took off his glasses. He wiped the lenses with his tie. It was a deliberately slow, theatrical gesture. "Mr. Sterling, you are lying, and I am going to prove it." Fred Sterling smiled again. "Good luck." But luck was not on his side. A week later, the audit requested by the Illinois Attorney General's office confirmed everything. There was systematic manipulation. There was suppression of hours. There was forging of documents. And there were also indications that Fred Sterling had used his influence to pressure Sterling Property Management to evict Ellie. The auditors found compromising emails, registered phone calls, suspicious bank transfers. The Illinois Attorney General's office recommended the suspension of Sterling & Co. Apparel's operating licenses until the irregularities were corrected. It also recommended the immediate payment of all overdue overtime to the seamstresses, over $200,000 in total. And it opened a criminal investigation for coercion and retaliation against the worker. Fred Sterling tried to appeal. He hired more lawyers. He filed for writs of habeas corpus, injunctions, everything he could. He spent a fortune trying to make the case disappear. But it was no use. The evidence was solid. The system, for once, worked, and Fred Sterling, who had always believed he was above the law, discovered he was not. With the eviction suspended and the labor compensation recognized, Ellie Vance was able to pay off her back rent. She also managed to build a small reserve, $300 saved in a savings account at the First Chicago Community Bank. It wasn't much. It barely covered a month's rent, but it was more than she had had in the last 6 months. It was, above all, a margin of safety, a cushion against despair. But more important than the money was the change that happened around her. Brenda Jenkins returned to the apartment, but this time with a different demeanor. She didn't bring her clipboard, didn't come with the evaluative gaze of someone looking for flaws. She came with a folder full of information, addresses, phone numbers, available social programs. She sat with Ellie, proposing a routine. Leo would stay with Mrs. Perez, the next-door neighbor, for Ellie's late workdays. Mrs. Perez, a widowed 60-something, loved children and helped. The school offered after-school tutoring, a city program Ellie was unaware of. St. Anthony's Parish on Ashland Avenue provided a room for a community sewing workshop, where Ellie and other seamstresses could work child-free. Ellie accepted everything. She signed the commitment term, attended Brenda's meetings, filled out forms, and provided documents. For months, she had felt alone. Now a fragile yet existing network surrounded her. People who cared, people who wanted to help. The community sewing workshop opened in January. A small room with 4 long tables, 6 Singer machines, donated by an unknown institute, and buzzing fluorescent lights. Walls white and peeling, floor cold concrete. Still, it was a safe space for Ellie to work, without fear. No clock watching, no worrying about Leo. Leo returned to school daily, his grades improving. He received an after-school computer scholarship, a city initiative for low-income children. When Ellie was at the workshop, he stayed with Mrs. Perez, who gave him bread and butter and let him play with Buddy, Sam's mutt. Sometimes Leo helped Mrs. Perez with groceries. Other times, he did homework in her living room while she watched afternoon programs. Maria Rodriguez also frequented the workshop. She quit Fred's atelier, refusing to return even after job regularization. She wouldn't work for an exploiter. She found employment at a larger garment factory with a signed contract and guaranteed rights. On free afternoons, she visited the workshop, sewing, talking, laughing. Ellie thanked her one February afternoon. Side by side, they sewed uniforms for a neighborhood youth choir. The machines created a comforting satisfaction, almost meditative rhythm. "Why?" Maria asked, eyes on the fabric. "For helping, for handing over the documents. You saved me." Maria stopped sewing. She looked at Ellie. "We help each other, Ellie. That's how it has to be." She smiled. "If I hadn't acted, I couldn't have faced myself." Judge Miles Harrington followed everything from a distance. He no longer had access to the case files. The case had been reassigned, but he knew, through colleagues, of the developments. Judge Thomas Hayes, the new judge, kept him informed out of professional courtesy. Miles knew that Ellie had managed to pay the rent. He knew the eviction had been suspended. He knew that Frederick Sterling was being prosecuted. He knew, too, that the community sewing workshop at St. Anthony's Parish was functioning, that women from the neighborhood had found a space of dignity and work there, and somehow that left him at peace. It was not a complete peace. It never would be. There was always that feeling that he could have done more, that he should have noticed the conflict of interest earlier, but it was a sufficient peace. The peace of one who did what was right, even when it was difficult. But Miles did not stop there. He sought out the Chicago Community Foundation, a non-profit organization he had financially supported for years, ever since a college friend invited him to be a patron. He proposed a donation: sewing machines, basic materials, tables, chairs. Fabrics, threads, scissors, rulers. Everything a workshop would need to function with dignity. "How much do you wish to donate?" asked the foundation's director, Sarah Kim. She was a small woman with white hair who had dedicated her entire life to social work. "Whatever is necessary," Miles replied. He was in her office, a simple room with white walls and photos of social projects hanging on the walls. "I want them to have structure, so they don't have to sew on top of their kitchen table, afraid they won't be able to pay the rent." Sarah Kim looked at him with attention. "Do you know someone who went through this?" Miles hesitated. "I do." "And is it because of this person that you are doing this?" It was. But it's not just for her. It's for all the others who go through the same thing and who we never see. The donation was made discreetly, no plaques, without his name in the spotlight. Miles did not want publicity. He did not want people to think he was buying absolution. He just wanted to help. He wanted that space to exist, for those women to have a chance. 3 months later, the foundation organized an event at the workshop. A call for applications to train local seamstresses in micro-enterprise management. Ellie, who was already operating with simple spreadsheets and defined deadlines, was invited to mentor the other women. She accepted with a mix of pride and shyness. She had never imagined that one day she would be in a position to teach someone. Miles attended the event, not as a judge, but as a patron of the foundation. He wore jeans and a white dress shirt, without his robe, without the formality of the courtroom. His shoes were plain, unpolished. He wanted to appear approachable. He wanted the women not to feel intimidated. When he entered the room, he saw Eleanor standing in front of a group of women, explaining how to calculate production costs. She pointed to a spreadsheet on the wall, spoke clearly, and answered questions with patience. There was something transformed in her, her shoulders straighter, her voice firmer, her gaze more confident. She recognized him immediately. She stopped speaking. She became still. The other women looked back, trying to understand what had happened. Miles approached. "Forgive the interruption." "No, it's fine," Eleanor said. I didn't know you would be here." "I am a patron of the foundation," he explained. "I assist with the donations." Eleanor looked at him with an expression difficult to decipher. It wasn't anger. It wasn't distrust. It was curiosity mixed with gratitude. "Was it you who donated the machines?" Miles hesitated, then nodded. "It was." "Why?" "Because I saw what you all did, you and Leo. And I believed you deserved a better structure." He paused. "You deserved not to have to fight alone." Eleanor remained silent for a moment, then extended her hand. "Thank you." Miles shook her hand. He felt her calloused skin, the strong fingers of someone who works with their hands. And something passed between them, something subtle, something neither of them could name. It was recognition. It was respect. It was, perhaps, the beginning of something more. The following months were ones of rebuilding. Eleanor expanded her small business. She began receiving larger orders: uniforms for schools, aprons for restaurants, custom apparel for events. She printed simple business cards, just with her name and phone number. She created an Instagram profile, where she posted. Her schedule became full. Leo continued studying, his grades always high, his notebook always at hand. He maintained the habit of noting everything, now not out of necessity but by method. He noted his mother's orders, the deadlines, the values. He helped calculate how much fabric was needed for each piece. Sometimes, when his mother was tired, he would respond to client messages himself. "My mom will call you tomorrow morning," he typed carefully. "Thank you for your understanding." And Miles began visiting the workshop more frequently. Not officially, just to follow the project's progress. He conversed with the seamstresses. He asked about difficulties. He noted suggestions. Sometimes he would watch their work, the rapid movement of their hands, the concentration on their faces, the rhythmic sound of the machines. There was something meditative about it, something that calmed him, and, inevitably, he would cross paths with Eleanor. At first, their conversations were formal, polite, a greeting, a question about how work was progressing, a comment on the weather. But gradually, they grew longer, more personal. They began to sit in the small patio behind St. Anthony's Parish, where there were 2 wooden benches and an untended garden. They talked while sipping coffee from disposable cups. "Is Leo doing well?" Miles asked, one afternoon in May. The sky was gray, threatening rain. "He is. He got a full scholarship to the neighborhood private school. His practice test score was the highest in the entire school." There was pride in her voice, pride and relief. "He's a special boy." "He is." Eleanor smiled. It was a tired but genuine smile. "And I have you to thank. If it weren't for your decision that day, I only did what was right." "No, you did more than that. You took a risk. You could have hidden the conflict. You could have presided over the case anyway, but you didn't." Eleanor looked at him directly. "Why?" Miles was silent for a moment. He stirred his coffee, even though it was already cold. "Because I saw Leo holding that notebook, and I thought, if that boy had the courage to do what he did, then I need to have it too." Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. "You know most people wouldn't do that, right? Most would protect themselves first." "I know." Miles looked at the garden, at the plants growing between the cracks in the concrete. "But I'd spent my whole life trying to distance myself from my last name, trying to prove I was more than just the son of a rich businessman. And in that moment, I realized this was my chance to truly prove it." There was something in Eleanor's eyes, a strength, a determination that fascinated him. It was different from the women he had known throughout his life. Women who frequented the same circles, who said the same things, who were interested in him for what he represented, not for who he was. "You also took a risk," he said. "You reported Fred Sterling, knowing you could lose everything." "I had no choice." Everyone has a choice. You chose to do what was right, even knowing the consequences. He turned to look at her. "That's real courage." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Sometimes I think I was foolish. If I hadn't reported him, I'd still have my job. I'd still have stability." "But you wouldn't be you," Miles said softly. "And Leo wouldn't have learned what he learned." And in that moment, something shifted. The distance that existed between them, the distance of the judge and the seamstress, of the rich and the poor, of the powerful and the vulnerable, disappeared. They were just 2 people who had weathered the same storm and emerged on the other side. Different, perhaps, marked, but whole. The conclusion was not sudden, nor dramatic. It was slow, built brick by brick, like all truly valuable things. Like careful sewing, stitch by stitch, unhurried, without shortcuts. Miles and Eleanor began meeting privately. Simple encounters, coffee at a bakery, a walk through Marquette Park, quiet talks on a bench, as Leo played with Buddy. There was no urgency, no pressure, just the slow discovery of their true selves, the stories they carried, the scars they held, the hopes they nurtured. Miles confided his lonely, wealthy upbringing, how money created an isolating shield. He never knew if people liked him or his surname. Eleanor shared her Pilsen childhood, her cleaner mother returning with cracked hands and aching knees, her father vanishing at 7, leaving a faded photo and unpayable debt. Gradually, their bond deepened, not burning passion or storybook romance. It was something deeper, more solid, a recognition of two who had fought, lost, and risen again. The certainty that, together, they could build what neither could alone. Leo, informed early, accepted Miles with his usual seriousness. He questioned Miles's intentions, seeking assurance he wasn't there to fix their lives with money, but to walk alongside them. Day after day, Miles proved his intentions genuine. He offered no easy solutions, never solving problems with checks. He was simply present. He listened, supported, respected. A year after their first workshop meeting, Miles asked Eleanor to marry him. No elaborate proposal, just him, her, and Leo at their Pilsen apartment's kitchen table, eating Eleanor's homemade pasta. The window was open, city sounds drifting with the warm evening breeze. "I wanted to ask something," Miles said. Eleanor looked at him, fork paused. "What? If you would marry me?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. Leo stopped eating, looking at Miles, then his mom, then back at Miles. "Are you going to treat her well?" "I am." "Are you going to respect her? Always. And you won't try to change us? Won't want us different from who we are?" Miles looked at the boy seriously. "I won't try to change you. I've learned more from both of you than taught, and I want to keep learning." Leo thought, then nodded. "Then it's okay." He resumed eating, as if a vital decision was made and dinner needed finishing. Eleanor laughed, then, with tears in her eyes, said, "Yes." The wedding was simple. At St. Anthony's Parish, Maria was maid of honor. Leo was the ring bearer, serious and focused, carrying the rings on a white cushion. Mrs. Perez was in the front row, crying discreetly. Brenda Jenkins was invited and attended, visibly moved. And Miles, for the first time in his life, felt exactly where he belonged. Not in a luxurious ballroom, not at a party with hundreds of people, but there, in that simple church, beside that strong woman, with that brave boy beside them. They did not have a perfect ending. They had a real ending. Ellie continued sewing. She opened her own small, formal sewing business with all proper registrations. Leo continued studying, always with the best grades, always with his notebook at hand. He earned a scholarship to university years later, studied law like Miles, but chose to work with human rights, defending workers. Miles continued being a judge. He retired at 60, then began teaching legal ethics at the same university where he had studied. And together, they built a life based on respect, on transparency, on a love that did not need grand gestures to be true. They lived in the apartment in Pilsen for 2 more years before moving to a modest house in the same neighborhood. Miles insisted on keeping Ellie's singer machine in the living room. "It's part of our story," he said. And it was. And whenever someone asked how it all began, Ellie would smile. That tired but genuine smile Miles had learned to love. And say, "It started when my son held up a notebook and told the wealthy judge, 'I'm here to defend my mother.'" And then she would add, her voice soft, "But it continued because the 3 of us chose, every day, to do what was right, even when it was difficult." Especially when it was difficult. And Leo, whenever he heard that story, would hold the old notebook, which he kept stored in a drawer, along with his childhood photos, and remember that sometimes love does not come from grand gestures, but from small acts of courage. The courage to document the truth, the courage to acknowledge a conflict, the courage to reach out, the courage to accept that we are not alone, that we need each other, that together we are stronger.